Have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored all the warning signs that they were slowly breaking your heart? My name is Margaret, I am 67 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe to our channel and give us a like, because sharing these real experiences helps other people feel less alone in their struggles. What happens when a mother's unconditional love meets a son's complete indifference? What happens when the woman who gave everything for her child becomes nothing more than an inconvenience in his new life? Today I want to tell you about the most painful lesson I learned at 67 years old, when I realized that being a good mother does not guarantee having a grateful son. I thought I had raised David right. For 28 years I believed I had been the mother every child deserves. I worked 2 jobs when his father left us, I never missed a school event, I paid for his college even though it meant I had to postpone my own dreams. I thought that all those sacrifices would mean something when I got older. I thought that the love I gave him would come back to me when I needed it most. How wrong I was. It all started 3 months ago when David announced he was getting married. I remember that day perfectly because it was one of the happiest moments of my life. I was sitting in my small kitchen in Denver, Colorado, drinking my morning coffee when my phone rang. David's voice sounded different, more excited than I had heard him in years. "Mom, I have news," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Jessica and I are getting married. We want to have a small ceremony next month." My heart filled with joy. Finally, I thought David would settle down and I would have the family I had always dreamed of. Maybe I would even have grandchildren someday. Maybe Jessica would be the daughter I never had. I started crying with happiness right there in my kitchen, holding that old phone that I had had for years because I could never afford to buy a new one. "Oh David, this is wonderful news," I said through my tears. "I am so happy for both of you. When can I meet her properly? I want to help with the wedding planning, I want to do everything I can to make this day special for you." But David's voice changed slightly when I mentioned helping. "Actually, Mom, Jessica has very specific ideas about the wedding. She wants to handle everything herself. But of course you will be there, you are my mother." I should have noticed that tone in his voice. I should have paid attention to how he said, "Of course you will be there," as if it was an obligation rather than a joy. But I was so excited about the wedding, so happy that my son was happy, that I ignored those first warning signs. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. David called me less frequently, and when he did call, our conversations were shorter. He was always busy with wedding plans, work, or spending time with Jessica. I understood, of course. A man in love should be focused on his future wife. I told myself that after the wedding things would calm down and we would have more time to talk. But during those weeks something strange started happening to me. I began having episodes of dizziness and weakness that I had never experienced before. At first I thought it was just the excitement of the wedding, or maybe I was not eating well because I was so focused on helping however I could. I was spending my savings on a beautiful gift for David and Jessica, and sometimes I skipped meals to save money. The first time I felt really weak was on a Tuesday morning. I was getting ready to go grocery shopping when suddenly the room started spinning. I had to sit down on my old couch and wait for the feeling to pass. My hands were shaking and I felt like I had no energy at all. I thought maybe I just needed to eat something, so I made myself a sandwich and the feeling went away. I did not tell David about these episodes because I did not want to worry him during such an important time in his life. He was planning his wedding, starting his new life with Jessica. The last thing he needed was to worry about his mother's health problems. I thought I was being considerate, protecting him from unnecessary stress. The wedding day arrived on a beautiful Saturday in May. I wore my best dress, the blue one I had bought 5 years ago for David's college graduation. I had saved money for months to buy something new, but I decided it was more important to give David and Jessica a generous gift than to spend money on myself. That had always been my way. David's needs came first, always. The ceremony was beautiful, held in a small church in downtown Denver. Jessica looked stunning in her white dress, and David looked so handsome in his suit. I sat in the front row, crying tears of joy as I watched my son promise to love and honor his new wife. I thought about his father, who had missed so many important moments in David's life, and I felt proud that I had been there for everything. During the reception, I tried to spend time with the young couple, but they were always surrounded by Jessica's family and friends. I noticed that Jessica's parents seemed to have a prominent role in everything, while I felt a bit like an outsider looking in. But I told myself that was normal. Jessica was the bride, It was her special day and her family naturally wanted to be involved. I did manage to have one conversation with Jessica during the reception. She was polite but distant, thanking me for the gift and saying all the right things, but I could feel that she was just being polite. There was no warmth in her eyes when she looked at me, no genuine interest in getting to know me better. I hope we can spend more time together now that you are part of the family, I told her, trying to sound welcoming and loving. Of course, Margaret, she replied with a smile that did not reach her eyes. We will definitely do that. But even as she said those words, I could feel that she did not mean them. Something in her tone, something in the way she looked at me, made me feel like I was already being pushed to the side. But I pushed those feelings away. I was being paranoid, I told myself. I was just nervous about gaining a daughter-in-law and worried about how our relationship would develop. After the wedding, David and Jessica went on their honeymoon to Hawaii. I was alone in my house for 2 weeks, and during that time the episodes of weakness became more frequent. I had several moments where I felt so dizzy that I had to hold on to furniture to avoid falling. My hands shook more often and I felt tired all the time, even when I had not done anything physically demanding. One morning, while David and Jessica were still on their honeymoon, I had my first real scare. I was in the bathroom getting ready for the day when suddenly everything started spinning violently. Before I could react, my legs gave out and I fell hard on the bathroom floor. The impact was so strong that I hit my head on the edge of the bathtub. I lay there on the cold tile floor for several minutes, scared and confused. My head was throbbing and my body felt weak and shaky. I managed to crawl to the bathroom door and use the doorknob to pull myself up, but it took all my strength. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a small cut on my forehead and a bruise that was already starting to form. I should have called someone. I should have gone to the hospital. But who was I going to call? David was on his honeymoon, living the happiest moments of his new marriage. I was not going to ruin that by calling him with my health problems. I had no close friends or family members nearby who could help me. I had spent so many years focused on taking care of David that I had not built strong relationships with other people. So I cleaned the cut on my forehead, took some pain medication and told myself it was just a dizzy spell. These things happen when you get older, I thought. I would be more careful in the future. I would move more slowly and hold on to things when I felt unsteady. When David and Jessica returned from their honeymoon, they seemed happy and relaxed. David called me to tell me about their trip, and his voice was full of joy as he described the beaches, the hotels, and all the romantic things they had done together. I was genuinely happy for him, but I also felt a distance in his voice that had not been there before. We had an amazing time, Mom, he said. Jessica loved Hawaii. We are already talking about going back next year for our first anniversary. That sounds wonderful, dear, I replied. I would love to see some photos when you have time. Maybe you could come over for dinner this weekend and tell me all about the trip. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Actually, Mom, this weekend is going to be busy. We are still unpacking and settling into married life. Jessica wants to reorganize the apartment and we have plans with some of her friends. Maybe next weekend. I felt a little disappointed, but I understood. They were newlyweds, they needed time to adjust to their new life together. I could wait. I had been patient for so many years, I could be patient a little longer. Of course, dear. Whenever it works for both of you. I just want to spend some time with you and get to know Jessica better. Yeah, definitely. We will make it happen soon, I promise. But that weekend came and went and David did not call. The next weekend was the same. Each time I called him, there was always something else they had to do, somewhere else they had to be. Jessica's family was visiting, or they had plans with Jessica's friends, or Jessica was not feeling well and needed David to stay home with her. I started to notice a pattern. Every excuse somehow involved Jessica and her needs, her family, her friends, her feelings. It was as if David's entire world now revolved around his wife, and there was no room left for his mother. But I tried not to think about it that way. I reminded myself that this was normal. When people get married, their priorities change. Their spouse becomes the most important person in their life. During those first weeks after the honeymoon, my health problems continued to get worse. The dizzy spells happened more frequently and I had several more incidents where I felt so weak that I had to sit down immediately to avoid falling. I started keeping a chair in my hallway so I would have something to hold on to if I felt unsteady. I was getting scared, but I still did not want to worry David. He seemed so happy with his new life, and I did not want to be the mother who created problems for her son's marriage. I had heard so many stories about mothers-in-law who caused trouble between couples, and I was determined not to be one of those women. But late at night when I was alone in my house, I sometimes wondered if I was making a mistake by not telling David about my health problems. What if something serious happened to me? What if these dizzy spells were a sign of something more serious? But then morning would come and I would convince myself that I was being dramatic, that these were just normal signs of aging, and that David had more important things to worry about. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, I finally managed to convince David to come over for dinner. I spent the whole day preparing his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans, just the way I used to make it when he was a child. I cleaned the house from top to bottom and set the table with my best dishes, the ones I usually only used for special occasions. But when David arrived, he was not alone. Jessica was with him, and I could tell immediately that she did not want to be there. She smiled and said all the polite things, but her body language told a different story. She kept checking her phone, looking at her watch and making comments about how they could not stay too long because they had other plans. During dinner, I tried to create conversation and get to know Jessica better. I asked her about her job, her family, her interests. She answered my questions, but her responses were short and not very encouraging. David seemed uncomfortable, caught between trying to be a good son and trying to keep his wife happy. "This roast is delicious, Mom," David said, trying to fill one of the awkward silences. "Just like you used to make when I was growing up." "Thank you, dear. I remember how much you loved this meal. I was hoping Jessica would like it too." Jessica looked up from her plate with a forced smile. "It is very traditional," she said in a tone that made it clear she did not consider that a compliment. I felt my heart sink a little, but I kept trying. "I would love to learn some of your favorite recipes, Jessica. Maybe we could cook together sometime." "I do not really cook much," she replied, looking at David. "We usually order takeout or eat at restaurants. David likes trying new places, do not you, honey?" David nodded, but I could see him looking uncomfortable. I remembered all the times he had told me how much he missed my home cooking when he was in college. Had that changed, or was he just trying to agree with his wife? The evening continued in that same awkward way. Every attempt I made to connect with Jessica was met with polite but cold responses. Every story I told about David's childhood was interrupted by Jessica changing the subject to something about their current life together. I felt like I was becoming invisible in my own home, like I was an unwanted guest at my own dinner table. They left earlier than I had hoped, making excuses about having to meet Jessica's friends for drinks. As I hugged David goodbye, I wanted to tell him about my dizzy spells and my concerns about my health. The words were right there in my throat, ready to come out. But Jessica was standing right behind him, tapping her foot impatiently, and I could not bring myself to create another source of tension. "I love you, son," I whispered in his ear as I hugged him. "I love you too, Mom," he replied, but he said it quickly and pulled away sooner than usual. After they left, I sat in my kitchen looking at the dirty dishes and feeling more alone than I had felt in years. I had been so excited about David getting married, so hopeful that it would mean more family time and closer relationships. Instead, it seemed like I was losing my son little by little, like Jessica was slowly erasing me from his life. That night, as I was washing the dishes, I had another dizzy spell. This one was stronger than usual, and I had to grip the edge of the sink to keep from falling. My vision became blurry and I felt nauseous. For a moment, I thought I was going to faint right there in my kitchen. When the feeling passed, I looked at myself in the reflection of the window above the sink. I saw an older woman, alone and scared, holding onto her sink like it was the only thing keeping her upright. For the first time, I seriously considered calling David and telling him what was happening to me. But then I remembered Jessica's impatient face, the way she had hurried David out of my house, the way she had made it clear that spending time with me was not something she enjoyed. I realized that if I called David with health problems, Jessica would probably see it as proof that I was trying to interfere in their marriage. She would probably convince David that I was being dramatic or attention-seeking. So I said nothing. I cleaned up the kitchen, took a shower and went to bed, hoping that tomorrow would be a better day. I told myself that things would improve with time, that Jessica would eventually warm up to me, and that David would find a way to balance his love for his wife with his love for his mother. I had no idea how wrong I was. I had no idea that this dinner would be one of the last normal evenings I would have with my son. I had no idea that Jessica's coldness toward me was not just shyness or adjustment to married life, but the beginning of a campaign to push me completely out of David's life. And I definitely had no idea that my dizzy spells and weakness were not just signs of aging, but symptoms of something much more serious that would soon put me in real danger. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the silence of my empty house, I still believed that love and patience would be enough to keep my relationship with David strong. If you are watching this and you have ever felt like you are losing someone you love, please remember that you are not alone. Sometimes the people we care about most make choices that hurt us deeply, but that does not mean we stop being worthy of love and respect. Please subscribe to our channel if this story is touching your heart, because there is so much more I need to tell you about what happened next. The weeks that followed that awkward dinner were some of the loneliest of my entire life. David called me less and less frequently, and when he did call, our conversations felt forced and rushed. I could always hear Jessica in the background, and I started to notice that David would cut our conversations short whenever she appeared. But what worried me more than my relationship with David was what was happening to my body. The dizzy spells were becoming more frequent and more intense. Some mornings I would wake up feeling so weak that I could barely get out of bed. My hands shook when I tried to hold my coffee cup, and sometimes I felt so unsteady that I had to hold on to walls just to walk from one room to another. I tried to convince myself that it was just stress. Maybe I was worried about David and Jessica, and that worry was making me feel sick. I had read that emotional stress could cause physical symptoms, especially in older people. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong with me. The second fall happened on a Thursday morning in July. I was trying to take a shower when suddenly the bathroom started spinning violently. I reached out to grab the shower curtain, but it was too late. I fell hard against the side of the bathtub, and this time the pain was much worse than before. I lay there on the wet bathroom floor, naked and scared, unable to get up. My hip was throbbing with pain, and when I tried to move, sharp pains shot through my entire body. I started crying, not just from the physical pain, but from the fear and loneliness that overwhelmed me. I managed to crawl out of the bathtub and reach for a towel to cover myself. Then I slowly made my way to the phone in my bedroom, every movement causing me agony. I knew I needed help, and for the first time I decided I had to call David, even if it meant interrupting his new married life. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely dial his number. When David finally answered, I could hear music and laughter in the background. It sounded like they were at some kind of party or gathering. "Hi Mom, this is not really a good time. We are at Jessica's sister's birthday party. Can I call you back later?" "David, please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I fell in the bathroom and I think I might be hurt. I need help." There was a pause, and I could hear David moving to a quieter place. "You fell? Are you bleeding? Do you need an ambulance?" "I do not know. I hit my hip really hard and I cannot get up properly. Could you please come over and help me? I am scared." I heard David sigh, and then I heard Jessica's voice in the background asking what was wrong. I could not make out David's exact words, but I heard him say something about me falling and needing help. Then I heard Jessica's voice, clearer now, saying, "David, your mother is always having some kind of crisis. She probably just wants attention because we are having fun without her." My heart stopped when I heard those words. I could not believe that Jessica would say something so cruel about me, especially when I was lying on my bathroom floor in pain. But what hurt even more was that David did not defend me. He did not tell his wife that she was wrong to say such horrible things about his mother. "David, are you there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, Mom, I am here. Look, we are really in the middle of this party and Jessica's whole family is here. Are you sure you cannot handle this yourself? Maybe you could call a neighbor or something." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. My own son, the child I had raised and sacrificed everything for, was asking me to call a stranger for help instead of coming to help his injured mother. And all because his wife's family party was more important than my well-being. "I do not really know my neighbors that well, David. Please, I just need someone to help me get up and make sure I am okay. It will not take long." I heard David talking to Jessica again, and this time I could hear her response clearly. "If you leave this party to run to your mother every time she has a little accident, she is going to think she can manipulate you whenever she wants attention." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica was not just being unsympathetic. She was actively trying to convince David that I was lying or exaggerating my injury to manipulate him. She was poisoning my son's mind against me. "Okay, Mom," David said, and I could hear the reluctance in his voice. "I will come over, but I can only stay for a few minutes. This is really important to Jessica, and I cannot just abandon her family's celebration." 45 minutes later, David finally arrived at my house. By that time I had managed to put on a bathrobe and make my way to the living room, but every step had been agony. When David walked in, he looked annoyed and rushed, like helping his injured mother was a huge inconvenience. "Where did you fall?" he asked, not even bothering to hug me or ask how I was feeling. "In the bathroom. I was trying to take a shower and I got really dizzy. I fell against the bathtub and hurt my hip." David looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was almost like suspicion, like he was trying to decide whether or not I was telling the truth. "You look fine to me, Mom. I mean, you are walking around and everything." "David, I can barely walk. Look at my hip." I lifted the edge of my bathrobe to show him the large bruise that was already forming on my hip and thigh. He glanced at the bruise for about 2 seconds and then shrugged. "It is just a bruise, Mom. Put some ice on it and it will be fine. These things happen when you get older. You need to be more careful." I could not believe what I was hearing. My son was looking at my injury like it was nothing, like I was making a big deal out of something trivial. Where was the caring, compassionate boy I had raised? Where was the son who used to worry about me when I had even a minor cold? "David, I am really scared about these dizzy spells. This is the second time I have fallen and I am worried that something is seriously wrong with me. Maybe I should see a doctor." "Mom, you are 67 years old. People your age have dizzy spells sometimes. It is probably just your blood pressure or something. You do not need to turn this into some big medical drama." There was that word, drama. The same word Jessica had used when she thought I could not hear her. I realized that Jessica had been filling David's head with the idea that I was a dramatic, attention-seeking mother who invented problems to get sympathy. "I am not being dramatic, David. I am genuinely concerned about my health. Look, Mom, I really need to get back to the party. Jessica's family is probably wondering where I went. Can you promise me you will be more careful in the shower? Maybe you should get one of those rubber mats or grab bars that old people use." Old people. My own son was referring to me like I was some frail, helpless old person whose problems were just part of aging and not worth taking seriously. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but I tried to hold them back because I knew that crying would just confirm Jessica's opinion that I was being dramatic. "Of course I will be careful," I said quietly. "Thank you for coming over." David was already heading toward the door. "Okay, good. I will call you tomorrow to check on you. Try to rest and take some pain medication if you need it." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in my living room with a throbbing hip and a broken heart. I sat there for a long time trying to understand what had just happened. The son who used to call me every day in college was now treating me like I was an inconvenience. The boy who used to cry when he got hurt and wanted his mommy to make it better was now dismissing my pain like it did not matter. I realized that Jessica was winning. Whatever she was telling David about me was working. She was slowly convincing him that I was a needy, dramatic mother who could not be trusted to tell the truth about my own health and well-being. Over the next few weeks, things got even worse. David's calls became even less frequent, and when we did talk, he seemed distracted and impatient. Every time I mentioned feeling unwell or having another dizzy spell, he would change the subject or tell me that I should see a doctor if I was really worried, but his tone made it clear that he thought I was overreacting. I started keeping a journal of my symptoms, thinking that maybe if I could show David concrete evidence of what was happening to me, he would take me more seriously. I wrote down every time I felt dizzy, every time I felt weak, every time I had to sit down suddenly to avoid falling. The list grew longer and longer each week. But I was afraid to call David again, afraid to ask for help again, because I did not want to confirm Jessica's opinion that I was a manipulative mother who invented crises for attention. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe these health problems were not as serious as I thought they were. One afternoon in early August, I decided to call David just to have a normal conversation, not to complain about my health or ask for help, just to hear his voice and feel connected to my son. But when he answered the phone, I could immediately tell that Jessica was coaching him on what to say. "Hi Mom, what is going on?" he said, but his tone was guarded, like he was expecting me to complain about something. "Nothing special, dear. I just wanted to hear your voice and see how you and Jessica are doing." "We are fine. Busy with work and everything. Jessica got a promotion at her job, so we have been celebrating." "That is wonderful. Please tell her congratulations from me. Maybe we could all go out to dinner to celebrate." There was a long pause and I could hear whispering in the background. Then David said, "Actually, Mom, we already celebrated with Jessica's family last weekend. And this weekend we have plans with her friends. Maybe another time." It was always Jessica's family, Jessica's friends, Jessica's plans. I felt like I was being systematically excluded from every aspect of my son's life. But I kept trying to be understanding, kept telling myself that this was normal for newlyweds. Of course, dear. I understand. Maybe next month we could plan something. Yeah, maybe. Listen, Mom, I have to go. Jessica and I are supposed to meet some people for drinks. After he hung up, I sat in my quiet house and realized that I had not seen my son in person since that day he came to help me after my fall in the bathroom. That was almost a month ago. A whole month had passed without my son visiting me, without him showing any interest in spending time with me. I started to wonder if this was how it was going to be from now on. Was I going to become one of those mothers who only hears from her son on holidays and birthdays? Was I going to spend the rest of my life alone, while David built a new life with Jessica that had no room for me? The third fall happened on a Saturday morning in late August. I was getting dressed to go grocery shopping when the worst dizzy spell yet hit me without warning. The room spun so violently that I could not even reach for something to hold on to. I collapsed right there in my bedroom, hitting my head on the corner of my dresser as I fell. This time I could not get up at all. The pain in my head was excruciating and I could feel blood trickling down my face. My entire body felt weak and shaky, like all the strength had been drained out of me. I lay on my bedroom floor for over an hour, drifting in and out of consciousness before I finally managed to crawl to the phone. I knew I should call an ambulance, but my first instinct was still to call David. Even after everything that had happened, even after the way he had dismissed my previous fall, he was still my son and I still needed him. This time when David answered, there was no party noise in the background, but I could tell from his tone that I was interrupting something important. Mom, what is it now? David, I fell again. This time I hit my head and I am bleeding. I think I need to go to the hospital. Are you calling from the hospital? He asked. No, I am still at home. I cannot get up. I need someone to help me. I heard David sigh heavily, and then I heard Jessica's voice saying something I could not quite make out. Then David said, Mom, if you think you need to go to the hospital, you should call an ambulance. That is what ambulances are for. But David, I am scared. I do not want to go alone. Could you please meet me at the hospital? Mom, we have plans today. Jessica made reservations at this restaurant we have been wanting to try for months. Can you call one of your friends to go with you? I started crying then, right there on the phone with my son. David, I do not have close friends like that. You know that. You're my family. You are the person I call when I need help. Mom, you need to stop being so dependent on me. I have my own life now. I have a wife and responsibilities. You cannot expect me to drop everything every time you have an accident. Those words felt like a knife in my heart. Dependent? I had never been dependent on David. I had always been the strong one, the one who took care of everyone else. The one time I really needed help, the one time I was scared and hurt and alone, and he was calling me dependent. I am not trying to be dependent, David. I am hurt and scared and I need my son. Look, if you are really hurt that badly, call 911. That is what you should have done in the first place instead of trying to make me feel guilty for having plans with my wife. And then he hung up on me. My son, the child I had given birth to and raised and loved with everything I had, hung up on me while I was bleeding on my bedroom floor, begging for help. I lay there for another hour, crying and feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Finally, I managed to call 911 myself. The paramedics were kind and professional and they took me to Denver General Hospital, where the doctors cleaned the cut on my head and gave me several stitches. The emergency room doctor was concerned about my repeated falls and dizzy spells. He asked me lots of questions about my symptoms and recommended that I see a neurologist for further testing. He said that falls like mine were not normal for someone my age, and that there could be an underlying medical condition causing them. When I got home from the hospital that evening with a bandaged head and instructions to follow up with specialists, I found a voicemail from David on my answering machine. Hi Mom, I hope everything went okay at the hospital. Sorry we could not make it, but like I said, we had plans that we could not change. Call me tomorrow and let me know how you are feeling. That message broke something inside me. He was not sorry that I had been hurt. He was not sorry that I had gone to the hospital alone and scared. He was only sorry that they could not make it, like it had been a casual invitation to a social event instead of his injured mother begging for help. I called David the next day like he had asked me to, and told him about the doctor's recommendations and the need for follow-up appointments. His response was exactly what I had started to expect. Well, I am glad you are okay, Mom. You handled it just fine on your own. Maybe this will give you more confidence to deal with these things independently. Independently. Like being abandoned by your only child when you are hurt and scared is some kind of character-building exercise. But the worst part was still coming. A few days later, I was talking to David on the phone when Jessica came home from work. I could hear her in the background and she was not being quiet about her opinions. "Is that your mother again?" I heard her say. "David, she calls you every time she stubs her toe. This is getting ridiculous. She is clearly just trying to get attention because she is jealous of our marriage." I could not believe what I was hearing. Jessica thought I was jealous of their marriage? She thought that my injuries, my hospital visit, my genuine fear about my health, were all just attempts to get attention? "Jessica, please," David said, but he said it quietly, like he was embarrassed by her behavior but not willing to really confront her. "No, David, I am serious. Your mother is trying to manipulate you. Every time we make plans or try to have fun together, suddenly she has some kind of emergency. It is like she cannot stand seeing you happy with me." I wanted to scream through the phone. I wanted to tell Jessica that I had spent 28 years wanting nothing more than David's happiness. I wanted to tell her that I had been thrilled about their marriage, that I had dreamed of welcoming her into our family. But I could not say any of that because David would just see it as more drama, more attempts to cause problems in his marriage. "Mom, are you still there?" David asked. "Yes, I am here. Listen, maybe Jessica has a point. Maybe you should try to be more independent. You managed to get to the hospital on your own and everything worked out fine. Maybe that is better anyway instead of always calling me first." In that moment I realized that I had lost my son completely. Jessica had convinced him that his mother was a manipulative, jealous, attention-seeking woman who was trying to interfere in his marriage. And David, the son I had raised to be kind and compassionate, had chosen to believe his wife instead of trusting the woman who had never lied to him in his entire life. "You are right, David," I said quietly. "I will try to be more independent." "Good. I think that will be better for everyone." After I hung up the phone, I sat in my living room and looked around at the house where I had raised David, where I had given him everything I had to give. I looked at the photos on my mantle, pictures of David as a baby, as a child, at his high school graduation, at his wedding. In every single photo I was smiling, proud, happy to be his mother. But now I realized that all those years of love and sacrifice meant nothing to him. When Jessica told him I was manipulative and attention-seeking, he believed her without question. When I needed him most, he chose her comfort over my well-being. When I was hurt and scared and begging for help, he hung up on me to go to dinner with his wife. I made a decision that night. I would stop calling David unless it was absolutely necessary. I would stop asking him for help. I would stop trying to be part of his life if my presence was such a burden to him and his wife. I would become the independent mother that Jessica wanted me to be, even if it meant being completely alone. What I did not know was that Jessica was not finished with me yet. She had bigger plans for getting me out of David's life permanently. And my health problems, which were getting worse every day, were about to give her the perfect opportunity to convince David that his mother was not just dramatic, but completely untrustworthy. If you have ever felt abandoned by someone you love, if you have ever had your pain dismissed or your truth questioned, please know that you are not alone in this struggle. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who hurt us the most. Please subscribe to our channel and give us a like if this story is resonating with you, because what happens next will show you just how far some people will go to destroy the bond between a mother and her child. After that devastating phone call where David essentially told me to stop depending on him, I kept my promise. I stopped calling him unless absolutely necessary. I stopped sharing my health concerns with him. I stopped trying to be part of his life. If independence was what he and Jessica wanted from me, then independence was what they would get. But keeping that promise was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. Every day I wanted to pick up the phone and call my son. Every time I felt dizzy or weak, my first instinct was still to reach for David. But I forced myself to remember his words, Jessica's cruel comments, and the way he had hung up on me when I was bleeding on my bedroom floor. So I suffered in silence. The dizzy spells continued to get worse, sometimes happening multiple times a day. I started planning my activities around them, never going too far from home, always making sure I was near something I could hold on to if I suddenly felt unsteady. I bought a walking cane even though using it made me feel old and frail because I was terrified of falling again. The weeks passed and David did not seem to notice that I had stopped calling him. In fact, he seemed relieved. When he occasionally called me, our conversations were brief and superficial. He would ask how I was doing, I would say I was fine, and then he would talk about his work or his plans with Jessica. He never asked about my health, never mentioned the falls, never seemed concerned about how I was managing on my own. I realized that this was exactly what Jessica had wanted. She had successfully convinced David that I was a burden, and now that I was no longer bothering him with my problems, he was perfectly happy to have minimal contact with his mother. But my body was not cooperating with my decision to suffer in silence. The symptoms were getting so severe that I was starting to have trouble doing basic daily activities. Some mornings I was too weak to make breakfast. Some days I was too dizzy to go grocery shopping. I was slowly becoming a prisoner in my own home. One September morning I woke up feeling worse than I had ever felt in my life. The room was spinning even while I was lying down, and when I tried to sit up, waves of nausea washed over me. I managed to make it to the bathroom, but barely. I was so weak that I had to crawl part of the way. As I was trying to steady myself against the bathroom sink, the worst dizzy spell of my life hit me. Everything went black for a moment, and the next thing I knew I was lying on the cold bathroom floor, my head throbbing with pain. I had hit my head on the toilet as I fell, and I could feel blood trickling down my face. But this time was different. This time I could not get up at all. Every time I tried to move, the room would spin so violently that I would have to lie back down immediately. I was trapped on that bathroom floor, injured and alone with no way to get help. I lay there for hours, drifting in and out of consciousness. Sometimes I would try to call out, hoping that maybe a neighbor would hear me, but my voice was too weak and my house was too isolated. I thought about David, about how he had told me to be more independent, and I wondered if this was what independence looked like. Dying alone on a bathroom floor because you were too proud to burden your ungrateful son. As the hours passed, I started to panic. What if I died here? What if David did not find out until days later, when someone noticed that I had not been seen around the neighborhood? What if my last memory of my son was him hanging up on me and telling me to stop being so dependent? Finally, as the sun was starting to set outside my bathroom window, I managed to crawl close enough to the door to reach my cell phone, which I had left charging in the hallway. Every movement was agony, but I was desperate. I could not die like this, alone and forgotten. I knew I should call 911, but even in my desperate state, my first instinct was still to call David. Despite everything that had happened, despite the way he had treated me, he was still my son and I still loved him. I still hoped that maybe if he knew how badly I was hurt, he would remember that he loved me too. My hands were shaking so badly that it took several attempts to dial his number. When David finally answered, I could hear music and laughter in the background again. They were at another party, another gathering that was more important than their injured mother. "Mom, what is wrong with you? Why do you sound so strange?" "David," I whispered because that was all the strength I had left. "I fell again. I have been on the bathroom floor for hours. I cannot get up. I think I am really hurt this time." "Mom, are you being dramatic again? Because Jessica and I are at her cousin's wedding reception, and this is not a good time for one of your episodes." Episodes. My son was calling my injuries and my genuine medical emergencies episodes, like I was some kind of attention-seeking drama queen who made up health problems for fun. "David, please. I'm not being dramatic. I hit my head and I am bleeding. I cannot stand up. The room keeps spinning. I need help." I heard David moving to a quieter place, but I could also hear Jessica following him, her high heels clicking on what sounded like a dance floor. "Is that your mother again?" I heard Jessica say, and this time she was not trying to whisper. "David, this is getting ridiculous. She calls every time we try to have fun. She is clearly jealous that we are happy." "Jessica, she says she is hurt," David said, but his tone suggested that he was not really convinced. "She always says she is hurt, David. Remember last time? She made you leave my sister's birthday party, and when you got there she was walking around just fine. She probably just wants you to leave this wedding and come running to her rescue like always." I could not believe what I was hearing. Jessica was rewriting history, making it sound like my previous fall had been fake, like I had been walking around just fine, when David had actually seen the bruises on my hip with his own eyes. "David," I tried to say louder, but my voice was still barely a whisper. "I'm not faking this. I really need help. Mom, look, I cannot keep doing this. Every time Jessica and I go somewhere, you have some kind of emergency. It is like you cannot stand to see me happy." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My own son thought I was so selfish, so manipulative, that I would fake injuries just to ruin his happiness. How had it come to this? How had the loving relationship I thought we had turned into this ugly, suspicious dynamic? David, I have never tried to ruin your happiness. I have always wanted you to be happy. I just need help right now. Mom, you need to learn to handle these things on your own. You're a grown woman. You cannot expect me to come running every time you have a little accident. This is not a little accident, David. I think something is seriously wrong with me. These falls are getting worse and I am scared. I heard Jessica's voice getting louder and more impatient. David, come on. You are missing the whole reception. Your mother is fine. She is just trying to manipulate you again. You know what, Mom? David said, and his voice was harder than I had ever heard it. Jessica is right. This pattern of yours needs to stop. You cannot keep calling me every time you feel dizzy or fall down. That is what doctors are for. That is what hospitals are for. But David, I am your mother. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. Does not that mean anything? It means that you did your job as a mother and now I am an adult with my own life and my own family. You need to accept that and stop trying to make me feel guilty for living my life. In that moment, lying on my bathroom floor with blood on my face and pain shooting through my body, I realized that I had completely lost my son. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed when he had nightmares, who used to tell me I was the best mommy in the world, who used to say he would always take care of me when I got old. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who saw his injured mother as nothing more than an inconvenience, an obstacle to his happiness with his wife. Please, David, I whispered one more time. I am begging you. I really need help. Mom, I am hanging up now. Call 911 if you think it is really that serious. Jessica and I are going back to the party. And then the line went dead. My son had hung up on me again, but this time it felt different. This time it felt final. This time I knew that he was not going to call back to check on me. He was going to go back to that wedding reception, dance with his wife, eat cake and celebrate love, while his mother lay bleeding on a bathroom floor just 20 minutes away. I lay there in the growing darkness holding my silent phone, and I felt something break inside me that I knew would never be fixed. It was not just my body that was broken from the fall. It was my heart, my spirit, my faith in the power of unconditional love. But I was not ready to die yet. Despite everything, despite the way David had abandoned me, I still had fight left in me. I managed to dial 911, and when the dispatcher answered, I told her that I was an elderly woman who had fallen and could not get up, that I had been on the floor for hours and needed immediate help. The paramedics arrived within minutes and they were wonderful. They treated me with kindness and respect, checking my injuries carefully and asking detailed questions about my symptoms. They were more concerned about my well-being in those few minutes than my own son had been in months. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor was the same one who had treated me after my previous fall. He recognized me immediately and looked concerned when he saw that I was back. Mrs. Henderson, this is your second visit for a fall in just a few weeks. These repeated incidents are very concerning. Have you seen the neurologist I recommended? I had to admit that I had not followed up with the specialist. After David's reaction to my previous hospital visit, I had convinced myself that maybe my problems were not as serious as the doctors thought. Maybe David and Jessica were right and I was just being dramatic about normal signs of aging. I want to run some tests tonight, the doctor said. These symptoms you are describing, the severe dizziness, the weakness, the repeated falls, they could indicate several serious conditions that need immediate attention. They kept me in the hospital overnight for observation and testing. As I lay in that hospital bed, alone and scared, I kept hoping that David would call. Surely the hospital would contact him as my emergency contact. Surely when he found out that I was sick enough to be admitted overnight, he would realize that I had not been making up my symptoms. But the phone never rang. David never called, never came to visit, never even sent a text message to check on me. I spent that entire night staring at the ceiling, wondering how the son I had loved so completely could care so little about whether his mother lived or died. The next morning, the doctor came to see me with test results, and his expression was serious. Mrs. Henderson, I need to talk to you about what we found. You have a condition called orthostatic hypotension, combined with some inner ear problems that are affecting your balance. This is a serious medical condition that requires treatment and monitoring. It explains all of your symptoms, the dizziness, the weakness, the falls. I felt a mixture of relief and anger when I heard those words. Relief that I finally had an explanation for what was happening to me, that I was not crazy or dramatic or making up my symptoms. But anger that David had dismissed my genuine medical condition as attention-seeking behavior, that he had chosen to believe Jessica's cruel characterization of me instead of trusting his own mother. The good news is that this condition can be managed with medication and lifestyle changes, the doctor continued. But you cannot live alone safely right now. These falls could result in serious injury or even death. Do you have family members who could help you, or should we contact social services about home care options? Family members who could help. I almost laughed at the irony. I had one family member and he was at a wedding reception celebrating love while his mother lay in a hospital bed with a serious medical diagnosis. I will manage on my own, I told the doctor. I have been doing it so far. Mrs. Henderson, you nearly died yesterday. You were on that bathroom floor for over 6 hours with a head injury. If you had not managed to call for help when you did, the outcome could have been very different. That night, I was released from the hospital with a prescription for medication, instructions for managing my condition, and a list of safety modifications I needed to make to my home. I also had something else, absolute proof that my health problems were real and serious, not the dramatic attention-seeking that Jessica had convinced David they were. I thought about calling David to tell him about the diagnosis, to show him that I had been telling the truth all along. But then I remembered his voice when he hung up on me, the way he had chosen to believe his wife's lies instead of his mother's pain. I realized that even with a medical diagnosis, David would probably find a way to minimize it or make it my fault. So I went home to my empty house and tried to figure out how to live with a serious medical condition while completely alone in the world. I installed grab bars in my bathroom, bought a medical alert necklace and arranged my furniture so I would always have something to hold on to. I was learning to be the independent woman that David and Jessica wanted me to be, even though that independence might literally kill me. But what I did not know was that Jessica was not satisfied with just isolating me from David. She had bigger plans and she was about to reveal just how far she was willing to go to permanently remove me from their lives. What I would discover about her in the coming days would shock me more than anything that had happened so far. 2 days after I came home from the hospital, I was organizing my medications when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw David's car, and for a moment my heart jumped with hope. Maybe he had finally realized that something was seriously wrong with me. Maybe he was coming to check on me and apologize for the way he had treated me. But when David got out of the car, Jessica was with him, and the expressions on both of their faces told me that this was not a friendly visit. They looked angry, determined, like they were coming to confront me about something. David knocked on my door harder than necessary, and when I opened it, he did not even wait for me to invite them in. He pushed past me into my living room with Jessica right behind him. "Mom, we need to talk," David said, and his voice was cold and accusatory. "Of course, dear. Please sit down. Can I get you anything to drink?" "We are not here for a social visit," Jessica said, and her tone was openly hostile now. She was not even pretending to be polite anymore. "David, what is this about?" I asked, genuinely confused about why they both looked so angry with me. "It is about your little performance at the hospital, Mom. We know what you are trying to do." I stared at David, not understanding what he meant. "What performance?" "David, I was genuinely hurt. I have a medical diagnosis now that explains all of my symptoms." Jessica laughed, but it was not a pleasant sound. "Oh please, Margaret. Do you really think we are that stupid? We know you manipulated those doctors into giving you a fake diagnosis so you could prove that your little accidents were real." I could not believe what I was hearing. Even faced with medical evidence, Jessica was still insisting that I was lying about my condition. But what was worse was that David was standing right beside her, nodding in agreement. "Mom, the hospital called me as your emergency contact," David said. "But here is the thing, Jessica's cousin works in the billing department at that hospital. She told us some very interesting things about your visit." My blood ran cold. I had no idea what Jessica's cousin might have told them, but I could see from their faces that they believed they had caught me in some kind of lie. "What are you talking about, David?" "We know that you specifically asked to be admitted overnight, even though the doctor said you could go home," Jessica said with a smug smile. "We know that you begged them to run extra tests because you wanted to make sure you had something wrong with you that you could use to make David feel guilty. That was not what had happened at all. The doctors had insisted on keeping me for observation because of the severity of my symptoms and the danger of my repeated falls. But I could see that Jessica had twisted the story to make it sound like I had manipulated the medical staff. "That is not true," I said quietly. "The doctors were concerned about my condition. They ran tests because they thought I might have something serious." "Right," Jessica said sarcastically. "And what a coincidence that these mysterious health problems only started after David and I got married. What a coincidence that they only happen when we have plans or when we are trying to enjoy ourselves." "Jessica, my health problems started months ago. I was having symptoms even before your wedding, but I did not want to worry David during such an important time in his life." "Oh, how convenient," she replied. "You were secretly sick all along, but you never mentioned it until after David was married and unavailable to cater to your every need." I looked at David, hoping to see some sign that he remembered the truth, that he remembered how I had been trying to hide my symptoms to protect his happiness. But his face was cold and suspicious, like he was looking at a stranger instead of his mother. "David, you have to remember. Even at your wedding I was having dizzy spells, but I did not want to ruin your day by mentioning them. I have been trying to protect you from worrying about me." "Mom, stop lying," David said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. My own son was calling me a liar to my face. Jessica is right. These convenient health problems always happen when we are trying to have fun or when we are not giving you enough attention. I felt tears starting to form in my eyes, but I tried to hold them back because I knew that crying would just confirm their opinion that I was being dramatic. "David, I have never lied to you in your entire life. Why would I start now? Why would I fake being sick?" "Because you are jealous of our marriage," Jessica said, not even trying to hide her hostility anymore. "Because you cannot stand that David loves someone more than he loves you. Because you want to be the most important woman in his life forever." "That is not true. I have always wanted David to find love and be happy. I was thrilled when you got married." "Then why," Jessica said, stepping closer to me with anger flashing in her eyes, "did you call David during our wedding reception last night crying and begging for help, when you knew it was one of the most important nights of our lives?" I stared at her, confused. "What wedding reception? David, what is she talking about?" "Do not play dumb, Mom," David said. "You called me during Jessica's cousin's wedding reception. You said you had fallen and needed help. You were crying and begging me to come to your rescue just like Jessica said you would." "David, that was not during a wedding reception. That was when I had my worst fall, when I was trapped on the bathroom floor for hours. I called you because I was genuinely hurt and scared." "Right," Jessica said with a cruel smile. "And what a coincidence that your worst fall ever happened to occur at the exact same time as an important family celebration." I realized what had happened. In Jessica's mind, my genuine medical emergency had been perfectly timed to ruin their fun. She had convinced David that I had somehow planned to get injured at the exact moment they were at a party, that I had orchestrated my own suffering just to make them feel guilty. "Jessica, you cannot seriously believe that I planned to fall and injure myself just to interrupt your evening. I think you are capable of anything to get attention," she replied coldly. "Including manipulating doctors into giving you fake diagnoses and lying about the severity of your symptoms. The diagnosis is not fake. I have a real medical condition that could have killed me if I had not gotten help." "Oh please," Jessica said, rolling her eyes. "You probably looked up symptoms online and then described them to the doctors until they gave you the diagnosis you wanted." I looked at David, desperate for him to defend me, to remember that I was his mother and that I loved him. But David was nodding along with everything Jessica said, like her cruel accusations made perfect sense to him. "David, do you really believe that I would fake a serious illness just to get your attention?" "I do not know what to believe anymore, Mom," David said, and his voice was full of disappointment and frustration. "All I know is that ever since I got married you have had one crisis after another. Jessica is right, it is like you cannot stand seeing me happy. I have spent my entire life wanting nothing but your happiness, David. Every sacrifice I made was for your happiness." "And there it is," Jessica said triumphantly. "The guilt trip. Poor Margaret, who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful son. Poor Margaret, whose selfish son dares to have his own life and his own wife. I am not trying to make anyone feel guilty. I am just trying to make you understand that I love David and I would never do anything to hurt him." "Then stop calling him every time you have a hangnail," Jessica snapped. Stop trying to make him feel responsible for every little problem in your life. Stop trying to compete with me for his attention. I am not competing with you, Jessica. There is room in David's life for both of us. No, there is not, she said, and her voice was final and cold. David is my husband now. His first priority is to me, not to his needy, dramatic mother who cannot accept that her little boy has grown up. I looked at David, waiting for him to contradict his wife, to tell her that he loved both of us and that we did not have to compete for his affection. But David said nothing. He just stood there, letting Jessica speak for him, letting her define the terms of our relationship. David, I said quietly, is this really how you feel? Do you really think I am jealous and manipulative and faking my illness? David looked uncomfortable, like he did not want to answer that question directly. Mom, I think you need to accept that my life has changed. I have a wife now and she has to come first. You cannot expect me to drop everything and run to your rescue every time you have a problem. I have never expected you to drop everything, David. I just expected that when your mother was genuinely hurt and scared, you would care enough to help. Well, maybe your expectations were unrealistic, he said, and those words felt like the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Jessica smiled triumphantly, like she had won some kind of competition. The bottom line, Margaret, is that David and I want you to stop calling us unless it is a real emergency. And by real emergency, I mean life or death, not your usual dramatic episodes. And how exactly am I supposed to prove to you that an emergency is real? I asked. Should I wait until I am unconscious before I call for help? Should I make sure I am bleeding enough to satisfy your standards before I bother you? You should handle your problems like an adult, Jessica replied coldly. You should call doctors or hospitals or 911. You should not expect your married son to be your personal caretaker. I have never expected David to be my caretaker. I have just expected him to be my son. Well, maybe it is time to adjust your expectations, David said, and those words broke my heart completely. After they left that day, I sat in my living room and realized that my relationship with David was over. Not just damaged or strained, but completely destroyed. Jessica had convinced him that I was a manipulative liar who faked illnesses for attention. And David had chosen to believe her instead of the woman who had given birth to him and raised him with unconditional love. I also realized that Jessica was not finished with me. The way she had looked at me, the things she had said, the satisfaction in her voice when she talked about adjusting my expectations, she had bigger plans for getting me out of their lives permanently. What I did not know was that Jessica had been collecting evidence against me, building a case to prove that I was an unfit, unstable woman who could not be trusted. And she was about to use that evidence in a way that would devastate me more than anything that had happened so far. But I was about to discover something about Jessica that would change everything. Something that would show me exactly who I was dealing with, and exactly how far she was willing to go to destroy the relationship between a mother and her son. If you are still with me on this painful journey, I need you to know that what comes next is the most shocking part of this entire story. Please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button if my story is touching your heart, because the betrayal I am about to reveal will show you just how cruel people can be when they want something badly enough. After that devastating confrontation with David and Jessica, I entered the darkest period of my entire life. I had lost my son completely and I knew there was no going back. The little boy who used to tell me he loved me every night before bed was gone forever, replaced by a man who saw his mother as nothing more than a manipulative burden. I spent the next few weeks in complete isolation, managing my medical condition alone and trying to accept that this was how my life would be from now on. I took my medication religiously, used my walking cane, and followed all the safety precautions the doctors had given me. I was determined to prove to myself, if not to David, that I could be the independent woman they wanted me to be. But late at night, when the pain and loneliness became unbearable, I would find myself staring at old photos of David and wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I been too protective when he was young? Had I made him feel smothered? Had I somehow failed as a mother without realizing it? I kept replaying every conversation, every moment from the past few months, trying to understand how Jessica had managed to turn my loving son against me so completely. How had she convinced him that 28 years of unconditional love meant nothing? How had she made him believe that I was capable of faking serious injuries just to get his attention? 3 weeks after that horrible confrontation, something happened that would change everything. I was sorting through some old mail when I found David's cell phone bill, which had been accidentally delivered to my address instead of his apartment. I knew I should just forward it to him without opening it, but something made me hesitate. I told myself I was just checking to make sure it was actually his bill before I sent it along. But deep down I think I was hoping to see something, anything, that would help me understand what had happened to my relationship with my son. What I found when I opened that phone bill was worse than anything I could have imagined. There, printed in black and white, were hundreds of text messages between David and Jessica, time-stamped from the weeks leading up to our confrontation. I knew I should not read them, that looking at private messages was wrong, but I could not stop myself. I needed to understand how my son had become someone I no longer recognized. The first few messages seemed normal, typical conversations between husband and wife about work, dinner plans, and mundane daily activities. But as I read further, I found messages that made my blood run cold. 3 days after David's wedding, Jessica had sent him a text that said, "Your mother is going to be a problem. I can already tell she is the type who will never let go and will always try to interfere in our marriage. We need to start setting boundaries now before she gets out of control." David's response was, "Mom has always been pretty independent. I think you might be worrying about nothing." But Jessica persisted, "David, you are being naive. I have seen how she looks at me, like she resents me for taking you away from her. She is going to try to cause problems between us. Mark my words." As I read through more messages, I watched Jessica systematically plant seeds of doubt about me in David's mind. She would send him articles about manipulative mothers and overbearing parents. She would make comments about how lucky David was to have a mother who finally had health problems now that he was married. She constantly suggested that my symptoms were fake or exaggerated. But the worst messages were the ones from the night I had my terrible fall, when I was trapped on the bathroom floor for hours. I found the conversation that happened right after David hung up on me, and it made me physically sick to read. David had texted Jessica, "Mom called again. Says she fell and can't get up. She sounded really weak and scared." Jessica's response, "David, do not leave this wedding for your mother. She is doing this on purpose because she knows tonight is important to my family. This is exactly what I told you she would do." David, "But what if she's really hurt this time?" Jessica, "She is not hurt, David. She is manipulating you. If she was really in danger, she would call 911, not call you to ruin our night. Please do not let her control you like this." David, "You're probably right. I just feel guilty." Jessica, "That is exactly what she wants you to feel. Guilty and responsible for her problems. This is how manipulative mothers operate, David. They create crises to test your loyalty to them versus your loyalty to your wife." Reading those messages, I realized that Jessica had not just been unsympathetic to my suffering, she had actively encouraged David to abandon me when I needed help most. She had convinced him that my genuine medical emergency was a calculated manipulation designed to test his loyalty. But as I continued reading, I found messages that were even more disturbing. Jessica had been planning our confrontation for weeks, strategizing about how to convince David that I was lying about my medical condition. 2 days before they came to my house, Jessica had texted David, "I talked to my cousin at the hospital. She said your mother specifically asked to be admitted overnight and begged for extra tests. This proves she was faking the whole thing for attention." I stared at that message in shock. Jessica's cousin had lied about what happened at the hospital, or Jessica was lying about what her cousin had said. Either way, Jessica had fabricated evidence to support her narrative that I was a manipulative liar. But the most devastating messages were the ones I found from just a few days ago. Jessica was not satisfied with just turning David against me, she was planning something much worse. Jessica to David, "I have been thinking about your mother's situation. Even if we cut contact with her, she is still going to find ways to interfere in our lives. She is still going to call you when she wants attention, and you are still going to feel guilty because that is how she programmed you." David, "What are you suggesting?" Jessica, "I think we need to make it impossible for her to contact us. Change your phone number, block her on social media, maybe even move to a different apartment so she doesn't know where we live." David, "Jessica, she is still my mother. That seems extreme." Jessica, "David, your mother is toxic. She is never going to accept our marriage, and she is never going to stop trying to make you choose between her and me. The only way we can have a peaceful marriage is to cut her out of our lives completely." David, "I don't know if I can do that." Jessica, "Think about it, David. When was the last time your mother made you happy? When was the last time a conversation with her did not end with you feeling guilty or stressed? She is poison in your life and poison in our marriage. As I read those words, I felt something die inside me. Jessica was not just trying to limit my contact with David. She was planning to erase me from his life entirely. She wanted me to disappear completely, like I had never existed, like the 28 years I had spent loving and raising David meant absolutely nothing. But there was more. The final messages I found were from yesterday, and they revealed Jessica's ultimate plan. Jessica to David, I have been researching legal options. Did you know that if an elderly person is deemed mentally incompetent or unable to care for themselves, their adult children can petition for guardianship? Once you have guardianship, you can make all decisions about where she lives and how she spends her money. My hands started shaking as I read that message. Jessica was not just planning to cut me out of their lives. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could control my life completely. David's response: Jessica, that seems like a lot of trouble. Can't we just ignore her calls? Jessica: David, your mother owns a house. He probably has savings and maybe life insurance. Something happens to her, all of that money could be ours. But if we wait too long, she might give it away or spend it on medical bills. If we get guardianship now, we can protect your inheritance. I dropped the phone bill and ran to the bathroom where I threw up everything in my stomach. My son's wife was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my house and my savings. She was planning to put me in some kind of facility where I would have no control over my own life. And she was convincing David that this was for my own good. I sat on my bathroom floor, the same floor where I had fallen so many times, where I had lain bleeding and alone while my son refused to help me, and I cried harder than I had ever cried in my life. Not just for the loss of my relationship with David, but for the realization of how much Jessica hated me, how far she was willing to go to destroy me completely. But as I sat there crying, something else began to grow inside me: anger. For months I had been blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, trying to understand how I had failed as a mother. Now I realized that I had not failed at all. I had been the victim of a calculated campaign of manipulation and lies. Jessica had targeted me from the beginning, seeing me as an obstacle to her complete control over David. She had systematically poisoned him against me, twisted every conversation, and fabricated evidence to support her narrative that I was a manipulative, lying mother who could not be trusted. I thought about all the times I had defended Jessica to myself, all the times I had made excuses for her coldness and tried to understand her perspective. I had been so naive, so trusting, so determined to see the good in the woman my son had chosen to marry. I had never imagined that someone could be so calculating, so cruel, so willing to destroy a family for their own selfish purposes. That night I made a decision. I was not going to let Jessica win. I was not going to disappear quietly and let her steal my son and my life. I was going to fight back, but I needed to be smart about it. The next morning I went to see a lawyer. I brought the phone bill with me, along with all the documentation of my medical condition and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened over the past few months. I told him about Jessica's plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and about her intentions to take control of my assets. The lawyer listened to my story with growing concern. He told me that what Jessica was planning could be considered elder abuse, and that the text messages I had found could be used as evidence of financial exploitation. He helped me take immediate steps to protect myself legally and financially. I also went to my doctor and requested a complete mental health evaluation. I wanted official documentation that I was mentally competent and capable of making my own decisions. The doctor was shocked when I told him about Jessica's plan, and he provided me with a detailed letter confirming my mental competency. But the hardest part was still ahead of me. I had to decide whether to confront David with the truth about his wife, or whether to let him go and protect myself from further harm. I spent days agonizing over that decision. Part of me wanted to show David the text messages, to prove to him that Jessica had been manipulating him all along. I wanted him to see who he had really married, to understand how she had systematically destroyed our relationship with lies and fabricated evidence. But another part of me realized that David had made his choice. He had chosen to believe Jessica over me, chosen her comfort over my well-being, chosen to abandon me when I needed him most. Even if I could prove that Jessica had been manipulating him, would that change the fundamental fact that he had been willing to believe the worst about his mother? In the end, I decided to write David a letter. Not to try to win him back, but to tell him the truth about what had happened and to say goodbye to the son I had lost. I spent hours writing that letter, trying to find the words to explain everything I had discovered, everything I had felt, everything I needed him to know before I closed this chapter of my life forever. Dear David, I began, by the time you read this letter, I will have made some changes in my life that will affect both of us permanently. I want you to know that I am not writing this to hurt you or to try to change your mind about Jessica. I am writing this because you deserve to know the truth, even if that truth does not change anything between us. I told him about finding the phone bill and reading the text messages. I described Jessica's manipulation campaign in detail, quoting her exact words about turning him against me and planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I explained about her lies regarding my hospital visit and her fabricated evidence about my medical condition. I want you to know that I understand why you believed Jessica instead of me, I continued. She is very convincing and she knows exactly how to make her lies sound reasonable and logical. She understood that the easiest way to control you was to make you believe that your mother was the problem, not her. I told him about the legal steps I had taken to protect myself, and about my decision to move away from Denver to start a new life somewhere else, where Jessica could not find me or continue her campaign against me. I am not running away because I am afraid, I wrote. I am leaving because I finally understand that there is no place for me in your life anymore. Jessica has won and I am tired of fighting a battle that I can never win. You have chosen to believe that I am manipulative, attention-seeking, and untrustworthy, and nothing I say or do will ever change that. But the hardest part of the letter was the end, where I had to say goodbye to the son I had loved more than my own life. David, I want you to know that despite everything that has happened, I do not regret a single sacrifice I made for you. You were the greatest joy of my life, and raising you was the most meaningful thing I ever did. I am proud of the man you became, even if that man no longer has room in his life for his mother. I hope that someday you will understand what really happened between us. I hope that someday you will realize that a mother's love is not manipulation, that asking for help when you are hurt and scared is not drama, and that the woman who gave you life and raised you with unconditional love deserves better than to be abandoned in her time of need. But even if that day never comes, I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgive you for choosing Jessica over me, for believing her lies instead of my truth, for hanging up on me when I was bleeding on the bathroom floor begging for help. I forgive you because that is what mothers do. We love our children unconditionally, even when they break our hearts. Please remember, if you remember nothing else from this letter, that I loved you with everything I had to give. You were never a burden to me, never an obligation, never anything less than the most precious gift I ever received. Whatever Jessica has convinced you to believe about me, please try to remember that. I sealed that letter and left it on David's windshield outside his apartment building, along with copies of all the text messages I had found. I did not wait to see if he would read it or what his reaction would be. I had said everything I needed to say, and now it was time for me to start my new life. 2 weeks later, I moved to a small town in Oregon, where I bought a little cottage near the mountains and began the process of rebuilding my life without David. It was not easy. There were days when the grief and loneliness threatened to overwhelm me. But I also felt a strange sense of freedom, like I had been carrying a heavy burden for months and had finally been able to set it down. I never heard from David after I left that letter. I do not know if he read it, if he confronted Jessica about the text messages, or if he simply threw it away and continued believing her lies. Part of me hopes that someday he will realize the truth and try to find me. But I am not waiting for that day anymore. I have made friends in my new town, other women my age who understand what it means to be alone later in life. I volunteer at the local hospital, helping other elderly patients who do not have family support. I have found purpose in my pain, using my experience to help others who are facing similar abandonment and neglect. My health condition is well managed now with medication and regular doctor visits. I have not had a serious fall since I moved to Oregon, partly because of the medical treatment, but mostly because I am no longer living in constant stress and emotional turmoil. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had been stronger from the beginning, if I had stood up to Jessica's manipulation earlier, if I had refused to accept David's cruel treatment of me. But I have learned that you cannot force someone to love you, and you cannot make someone choose you over their own selfish desires. What I learned from this devastating experience is that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. Sometimes the children we raise with unconditional love grow up to become adults who see that love as a burden rather than a gift. Sometimes the sacrifices we make for our families are not appreciated or remembered, but are instead used against us as evidence of our manipulation or neediness. But I also learned that I am stronger than I ever imagined. I survived the loss of my son, the betrayal of my trust, and the cruelest kind of emotional abuse. I learned to live independently not because David and Jessica forced me to, but because I chose to reclaim my life and my dignity. If you are watching this video and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have been abandoned by someone you love or manipulated by someone you trusted, please know that you are not alone. Please know that their treatment of you says nothing about your worth as a person and everything about their own character. And if you are someone who has an aging parent, please remember that they will not be here forever. Please remember that the woman who gave you life and raised you with love deserves your respect and care in her final years. Please do not let anyone convince you that your mother's needs are manipulation, or that asking for help is drama, or that the person who loved you first and longest is somehow your enemy. I may have lost my son, but I found myself. I may have been abandoned by the person I loved most, but I discovered that I am capable of creating a meaningful life on my own. Jessica may have won the battle for David's loyalty, but she could not win the battle for my soul. My name is Margaret Henderson. I am 68 years old now, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. Thank you for listening to my story, and please remember to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like if it touched your heart, because sharing these experiences helps other people feel less alone in their struggles. Sometimes the most painful stories are the ones that need to be told the most.